Hello, everyone. What an energizing day that we've had. I know today we've talked a lot about how power is shifting across business and leadership and culture. And today I'm very excited because I'm joined by two women who are building platforms that are incredibly intentional, cohesive, but look very different from the types of businesses that we've explored today. They're not just launching ventures, but they're launching incredible businesses with advocacy and impact at its core. So thank you both for joining us so much. Karlie, I'll start with you because we've talked so much about how earlier in your career in the modeling, you were very much defined by this singular job title. The concept of the multi-hyphenate didn't really exist. But now you've expanded in terms of a number of different areas, code with Klossy, you are in the media business and the like, and you also have a lot you're doing on the impact space. But when you looked at these ventures, did you start to design them with intentionality? And how did you think about these pieces reinforcing each other?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us. I hope everybody out there is still awake. I know it's been a long day, so we're excited to be here with you all. And you know, I think if somebody's looking at my career on paper, it makes no sense. It is non-linear, but it is deeply authentic to who I am. I was 14 years old, walking in a mall in Missouri, and discovered, and my life took a totally different turn into fashion. And before that, my life plan was to be a doctor or a teacher. And I think those two careers to me always kind of embodied a life of purpose, a career of purpose. And I think that was something that from a very young age, I always knew I wanted to spend my time doing things that could help others. And so, you know, I sort of back-ended my fashion career into using, and it wasn't a platform, I'd say, at the beginning. You know, social media developed around the same time that my career really took off. And that enabled me to have a voice and a platform, and to not just be a face, but also to speak my truth. And you know, as a young woman, also growing up in sort of a public way, it took me time to feel what that was. But I just am guided by authentically what I care about, and I put that into action in terms of both impact and what I invest in and what I spend my time on, which really kind of is in three buckets. It's been 10 years now. I founded Code with Klossy, and over the past decade, we've taught more than 11,000 young women and gender-expansive teens how to code. So amazing, amazing young women like Phoebe who are building the world that they want to live in and building ideas into reality through technical skills. And so Code with Klossy is, you know, we have 3,000 more young people in our programs this summer, and that is something that I spend a lot of my time on. And then the other is Gateway Coalition, and that is about supporting access to reproductive care. And Phoebe and I have partnered on a lot of work in this space. We launched a series called Everybody's Fight to really storytell about what's happening across this country for reproductive care and the lack of access. And then the last thing is in media. And so I acquired ID Magazine last year, and we just brought it back to life and to print. So, yeah.
I'm always in favor of that, people bringing up.
I've got a lot to learn from you.
But I think it's such an important point that you bring up, just an intentionality, but the very entrepreneurial approach that now different generations and leaders are taking in terms of building these types of platforms, as I said, that really reinforce each other. Phoebe, you're in a very exciting moment. You just launched your company, a fashion tool built around transparency, sustainability, and the like, helping customers make more intentional choices in that space. At the same time, you have a very popular podcast. You are also deeply involved in issues such as reproductive rights and the like. When you look at these types of things that you're building out, what do you think it takes to design this type of portfolio of things that really reflect what your generation values and how other types of businesses and leaders can think about what that looks like in a very different realm?
Yeah, I think for me, honestly, I got really lucky because I got to grow up seeing my mom and having her career as a software engineer and then a manager and then building out a giant team underneath her at Microsoft and then, you know, really kickstarting her work that her and my father did in philanthropy. So I got to see and look up to a bunch of super multifaceted people in their different careers. Karlie's the cornerstone example of this. And so I think for me, when I started Phia with my co-founder at Stanford, which is, you know, really a tool to make sure that consumers are getting the best price as they shop, it became very clear to me that there wasn't a resource that we needed, which is watching, you know, other people who've started these businesses and actually having a platform where you can speak about, hey, we're learning this in the business, and you can ask other experts. And that's how Burnouts was born. And then for the reproductive freedom work, it really was like, okay, well, Dobbs has been overturned. The next generation is going to have less rights. How am I going to sit back and not do something about that? So I think it's really about having these things naturally born within your values, whether that's me caring about consumers, being able to get the best deal or sustainability, whether that's caring about women in entrepreneurship and expanding access to knowledge, or caring about reproductive freedom. And really having the right team built out around you that can support you in doing everything, I think is huge. And that's a big thing I've learned from Karlie as well.
No, but the intentionality around which you've done it, and I love how, for example, a podcast so reinforces the experience that you're going through right now as an entrepreneur. You know, Karlie, you talked about sort of impact and purpose at the center of your work. So many businesses try embed that in their organizations, but oftentimes it's just a paintbrush and not necessarily authentic or to the core in such a meaningful way. As you look across sectors, how do you think about how that type of alignment can hold? What have you learned in terms of what you say yes to and what you have to say no to in terms of building out these different pieces?
Well, I mean, how it guides what I invest in is, you know, I've always sort of thought, how can I get behind, one, people I believe in, and ideas that can either be better for the planet or for a consumer or solve a big problem that I am equally passionate about. And I think I learned early on that capital is the means of power. And I think that's something I want more girls and women to really realize and embrace. And I was lucky to start a career quite young and be independently able to put my capital to work. And so, you know, and I think for me, that's why I'm so inspired by, I mean, this incredible young woman is a force. And I think, you know, I've met so many, you know, incredible people in our community. I mean, Klossy is an incredible sort of community of next generation young talent who are building great ideas. And I think that's what I try to focus my time on and my dollars behind, and, you know, and align with others in doing that work.
Yeah, advocacy is so powerful in the work you've done together and the like. And Phoebe, for you, you've talked about, for example, reproductive rights as fundamental to economic empowerment. Again, laddering up to the type of work that you do. But we're also in an environment right now where taking positions can be very polarizing and doing so in the context of building out businesses and the like. How have you thought through in terms of, again, bringing that alignment and being able to lead with your values in a way that reinforces all of the platforms that you're building?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm in a really privileged position where like my education was paid for. I was able to get the hard skills that I needed to be able to go and start a business. That's why things like Code with Klossy are so important. If you don't have access to that education, you can't go forward and start the app you want to build, start the company you want to build, try this or that. And I think it's really interesting when you think about, like, I really don't think of risk when I think about saying, oh, women should have a fundamental right to choose about their body. That's just like, that shouldn't be risky for anybody to say, because we know when a woman has access to choose to have birth control, to choose to have children, we know that's how society is industrialized. Like, we know that there is no society when you look at when women have access to birth control and access to make a choice, that's how a society and the economy grows, because you can't have 50% outside the economy. There's nothing controversial about that or dangerous about saying that. And so I think for me, it's really about being rooted in the fact that, like, I'm in such a lucky position to be able to have had the education that I needed, to get the hard skills I needed, to have parents that I got to look up to, and then to be able to be true to my values. I don't think that there's anything, you know, I think it's about recognizing that privilege and being honest about where you stand.
And I think that's something Phoebe and I have always really bonded over as friends, but then also been deeply collaborative in this work, because I think this sort of idea of, and everyone in this room, you know, we have, you know, you have a voice, you have a vote, you have power, privilege, a platform, influence, what you can do with it and align with others to sort of get behind the things that you care about. And I think that that's, you know, where we've really, you know, there's so many, we've really come together around that. And I think it can be intimidating because it is such a fraught time, and a topic like reproductive access is unfortunately politicized, and it shouldn't be, because it's about bodily autonomy and dignity for an individual to be able to make that choice if and when they are ready to start a family. And I think that's where, you know, we're living in a time right now where you have to stand up for what you believe in, despite you don't have to do it publicly. And I think that's at least where Phoebe and I have been proud to sort of be public about this work and come together around telling these stories and moving a lot of dollars to philanthropically behind a lot of these efforts, because this is the reality, unfortunately, of what's happening. And that's why storytelling in so many ways matters, because it might not be somebody's lived experience here in the state of New York, but back in Missouri, where I'm from, unfortunately, I mean, many thousands of women millions of women, 25 million women across the United States live in a state with some type of ban on abortion. And so this is the reality for many women across this country. And so, we're trying to do what we can with what we have to push this forward.
And I want to dig into the storytelling aspect of what you're doing, because both of you have talked about how creating these narratives is so powerful. It's not just your platform, it's really an infrastructure to what you do. It determines how you influence who moves, builds community, and really who gets seen in the world. Can you share why you've really leaned into, whether it be the work you've done with Phoebe, the work you've done now in terms of exploring media, the power of these narratives to build both businesses, but also things that reinforce your value?
Well, I guess I just authentically sort of follow what I'm passionate about. The work that I do also with ID, is really about storytelling and creating, sort of pulling in and up the next generation of talent and creatives and creators, and doing what I can to sort of support that, because that's how I sort of came up and was able to build my career. And I think that's why, to Phoebe's point earlier about access, Code with Klossy is all about how do we democratize access to these skills, and whether it's basic skills or a community or capital, how do we democratize access or information of just what's going on, with an issue like reproductive rights. So, I think that's what I really focus on, is how can I use sort of the position I'm in to democratize access and help other people at least be aware. They can choose or not to engage, but that's what I've centered sort of how I choose to do something or not.
Phoebe, as you're launching your ventures in these early stages, you've also put storytelling really at the forefront, whether it be talking about your new company, as I mentioned, your podcast, and the like. What do you think is different in terms about how you and your generation and your peers are thinking about this alignment and the power of storytelling that's very different than how bigger companies or leaders of different stages have traditionally approached this?
Yeah, I think we as humans are innately multifaceted, and that's why I think a personal brand for anybody is so important. Like, if you want to be forward-facing, if you want to start something, people don't want to buy like companies, they don't want to buy brands. They want to buy you, sweaty, tired, like learning how to do something. And so I think that's why being like vocal and like that's what my generation is interested in. Like, they're interested in creators who are like doing genuine day in the lives where they're stressed out or they're crashing out or they're trying something. And I think also it's about knowing who's the right person to tell the story. Like on Burnouts, our podcast about business, I'm not saying, hey, do this with your career, do that with your career, because that would be ridiculous. I just launched my business. We're bringing on other, mentors like Karlie, like, different founders like Sarah Blakely to talk about their experiences and what they learned and to ask the questions that we want to ask. And then even with like Phia, the app we've built where you can, download us as an app and then instantly get price comparisons to shop or find an item used. We're doing some founder-led marketing, but we're bringing in people who find better deals using our application and having them make videos and then just uplifting those. And that's a big thing for our series we've done about Everybody's Fight. You don't want to watch a little video of me and Karlie talking about reproductive rights. You want the doctors who are fighting for their lives to give these procedures, or doctors in med school who can't learn how to give life-saving procedures to talk to the camera. And so it's all about just once you have that platform of your personal brand, then taking different values or things you care about and uplifting those stories. But I think for me, the biggest thing I've learned is don't try and be in every single lane. Just uplift the content you care about and speak true to your content. Don't try and be an expert on something you're not.
You both are doing things in the philanthropic space, but also in the business space. Karlie, I'd be curious, Code with Klossy is a nonprofit. You work with many, many large businesses. You have a number of business ventures you're leading as well. How do you think about the alignment in a way of where impact is really at the forefront of these endeavors, but how do you think about it in a way of creating businesses that have enduring power, where it really can be a backbone for creating the longevity of the businesses and driving real value and growth in a way that we may not have appreciated before?
Well, one, I mean, I could have never imagined the scale that, 10 years ago when I launched this. I went to actually a coding boot camp on this street. It was called the Flatiron School. It was like two houses down. And that's where I initially learned how to code and very sort of fundamentals of how you build something, front end, back end. And I think that, to me, opened my eyes in such a profound way. And I think, I wanted to, it started with 20 scholarships, and then this summer we're gonna have 3,000 scholarships. And so we're now reaching a point of scale, but when I think about long-term sort of the effects of that, I'm really hopeful for the future, because those 11,000 alumni, of the alumni who go on to college, 70% get a degree in computer science. And that, to me, is a huge reflection of just how pivotal something like our program can be to help inform the choices that they make, the careers that they pursue, seeing inspirations and mentors and role models like Phoebe, building ideas with purpose and with intention into reality. It doesn't matter how young you are. We're living in a world where we all have access to these tools. And we all can be entrepreneurial. And so to me, when I think about long-term impact and the sort of systems change that, it's a small number in the scheme of the world, but our 11,000 plus 3,000 more this summer, those scholars are gonna spend, what they're gonna do in the years ahead and decades ahead to sort of build the world that they wanna live in. That, to me, is a way that I'm investing in long-term change.
Phoebe, for you, I'd be curious, when you're looking at the work that you want to do, this entrepreneurial endeavor, you're looking at the business runway in front of you, how do you think about impact in terms of building a resilient and strong business? How do you think about it in a way that might be different than how more traditional businesses have thought about bringing in those types of values? Because it's very much at the forefront of what you do, but it also feels like it's inextricably linked to creating a sustainable, dynamic business for you.
Yeah, I think for me, the stability of the business really comes down to the product. So starting from, if you can have a product that continually evolves. I think what we've seen with Phia is, frankly, it's really interesting because the e-commerce space really hasn't developed in the last 5 years. We got Amazon, which is great. We have these luxury e-commerce sites. But if you think about personalization or personalized discovery for a user, that isn't there. This user's been really underserved. Frankly, 2% of VC funding actually goes towards just female founders, which is crazy, but it's also a huge opportunity. That means we're not focusing on a lot of companies or a lot of pain points that distinctly just women have. And if you think about the female power shopper, it's table stakes that we should have something that should show her the resale value of an item and should show her in one click if it exists cheaper secondhand or on another site. And so I think it's really, for us, it's about, okay, the sustainability of building the first product, getting that to market, and really focusing on what consumers want, which is getting the best price, and then continuing to build new features, but staying really close to the consumer to learn, okay, what actually does she want? So we do something literally every week where we have 40 women come to our office and we say, just rip the app apart, just roast it. It's very tough for my ego, but it teaches me a lot about what do we need to develop so consumers will stay on this app and keep doing things. So that's, for me, how I think about a sustainable business, is just continually shipping and staying really close to the consumer.
One of the things that both of you spend a lot of time doing is building partnerships to really advance your businesses, to collaborate to achieve these missions. Karlie, what does it take for you, or what have you learned for what it takes to create an impactful partnership? You work so much, for example, in the business sector. You work, with Klossy in terms of getting great partners into this. Where do collaborations work, and where have they gone wrong?
Well, Code with Klossy was built off of my career partnerships. So Estee Lauder has been a long-time supporter of our work. Carolina Herrera. We've had so many incredible partners that I work with as a model, and that partnership, to me, has also, those values alignment, I think, have always informed the kind of companies I want to work with and be the face of and spokeswoman of and stand beside their values and their company. So, that has always been a very integral part of how we've been able to grow and scale. Now we're at this point with Code with Klossy where we have more than 70% of our alumni are over the age of 18. And so what we're really thinking about now is supporting them along their sort of career path and access to internships and job opportunities. And so that's where we're really building out sort of this next chapter of our work and of partners and working with corporate partners and startups. We're going to send Phoebe some interns, and how to sort of further connect those dots. But I think that I surround myself with people, both my dear friends and also partners, that are values aligned. And I think you can accomplish so much more when you do that. And so and then also as an investor, I've been an angel investor longer than it was sort of like a trendy thing to do. We were talking about, this is a very portfolio, financially focused. I have sort of my sleep easy investments and always have, but I've always had a lot of, passion in investing in ideas and in these sort of seeds of ideas that can become big, transformative companies. And so for me, I think of myself as a partner to those founders. I invested in Away Suitcases very early, Athletic Brewing, Seed Health, so many companies. And so I think that's where you can accomplish so much more when you work with others.
Phoebe, for you, as I said, you're just in the early stages of your career. I was saying earlier, you're spinning so many different plates. And I said, how do you sleep? And she said, you basically don't, which is a testament to how you've been able to get done all that you've gotten done. But I think what's also very different right now is your runway ahead of you. There's many, many chapters in terms of businesses, in terms of advocacy and impact and the like. When you're at this vantage point right now, how do you think differently about building a business empire or your career in a way where what you're doing right now may not be the final destination and probably intentionally isn't?
Yeah, I think for me, you have to have core focus on what are you doing right now? And for me, 100% my business is my core focus. And everything else I do gives me energy to focus on my business. Whether it's the podcast, I'm learning things from critical mentors. I'm creating the podcast that I want to listen to where I can actually ask stupid questions I want the answers to. With my philanthropy work, that is an issue I care about, and it just really, really makes me upset that my generation is going to have less rights than my mom's generation. That's ridiculous. And so that fuels me and gives me the energy to be able to pour into my business. But when I think about the future of where I want to be, I'm always thinking about the next 6 months. I'll sit down and I'll plan out where do I want to be 6 months from now? How do I want to be a better co-founder, a better friend, a better partner on philanthropy work? That for me is really what I'm focused on, is just continually learning. But I think it's important to have okay, what is your number one focus? Because particularly with the startup, you have to be all in.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, you all are building sort of empires that are not in the traditional shape and form, many different dimensions to them. For those who are in more traditional sectors or more traditional career paths, if they were to look at each of your stories or the work that you're leading, what do you think is a helpful takeaway or one insight that you think more traditional sectors can leverage to better engage with different generations or to be able to more authentically embrace opportunities to leverage platforms in a meaningful way?
I think everyone in this room has tremendous influence in a number of different mediums. Of course, capital and time and knowledge. And I would say one thing that has been instrumental in my life is having mentorship. And I know Phoebe's as well. And I think that's something, that everyone can sort of think of a young person or a couple of people that you can sort of lean in and be vulnerable to. Because I also think there's an enormous amount of pressure we put on ourselves as young people. And I sit here and I look at awe in Phoebe because this woman is a force. She finished school in less than 3 years and she's building this incredible company and this successful podcast. And I'm I think we put so much pressure on ourselves, and I would say, reach out and sort of pull somebody in and up and share sort of your experiences, because I think it can be overwhelming and intimidating, and I do think mentorship is a big part of what we do at Code with Klossy too. Our alumni come back as instructor assistants and sort of in a near peer leadership way help teach the next couple of years behind them scholars. And so that's something everybody can do. And then of course, there's many other things, but that's...
And Phoebe, to you, as again, you're a generation that really is just entering the workforce in a meaningful way. When others look at what you're building right now, what do you think the takeaway is that you think is emblematic of just what's important to your generation, but also can help advance opportunities across the broader business sector?
I think not letting perfection be like the enemy of progress. Like if I had waited forever to launch our app, it never would have happened. If I had waited forever to put myself in front of a camera when I had no idea what I was doing on the podcast, it never would have launched because it would have been bad. And so I think just this idea of like putting yourself forward, even if you don't know all the right answers, asking the questions and actually taking your thoughts towards action is the biggest thing.
And I think that resonates even deeper, like you said, with, I mean, everybody who hasn't listened to her podcast, that's my other piece of advice, burnouts.
No, it is a very relatable experience, founder or not, in terms of just the universality of when you were in the build and the highs and lows of all that we do. So Phoebe, Karlie, thank you so much for your insights, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.